Hi everyone, I'm Robin Russell. Welcome to Two-Lane Traveler. Today we are exploring Carter Country down in southwest Georgia, and we are with my very special guest, President and Mrs. Jimmy Carter. So stay with us.
Two-Lane Traveler is brought to you by the generous support of the Georgia Department of Transportation and the following organizations. The perfect getaway has been here all along. Perhaps you were just too close to see it. Discover the treasures of Georgia. On your two-lane travels through Georgia, explore our 63 state parks and historic sites where you can enjoy camping, hiking, fishing, picnicking, and more. Georgia State Parks. Come out and play. Imagine a musical landscape where young bluegrass pickers perform with old blues musicians, jazz players, country crooners, and rock and rollers. Now, go find it. Savor the Southeast. Visit us on the web at www.escapetothesoutheast.com.
There's a small town in southwest Georgia that almost everyone in America has heard of. Now, I think it's safe to say that just about every town in the country has something they feel gives them bragging rights. But this little sleepy town has one huge claim to fame. This town of Plains produced the 39th President of the United States. Plains, as well as the surrounding area, have an abundance of interesting sites to visit. To get to Plains, take I-75 to Cordele, where you'll pick up Highway 280, which takes you through Cordele, Leslie, Americus, and then on to Plains. Our first stop was at the Plains Historic Inn and Antiques. I know that you had some help, but I have to believe that your heart is right here in each of these rooms. And your heart must be here. I mean,
every detail.
You were a carpenter.
I'm pretty much familiar with every brick in the place. Because at first this was just an old dilapidated building and had white plaster walls. The plaster was coming off. So we had to strip all the plaster off the walls and by hand restore these bricks the way they were. And the floors are the original floors. We have had our eyes on these two buildings for a long time. So the final decision made by the people of Plains, the entire community, is to have a wonderful antique mall downstairs and a unique inn upstairs. And over a period of months, the decision was made that in the inn, which only has 7 rooms, every room would be different. And each one would commemorate in the most authentic way a particular decade of this century, beginning in the 1920s and going all the way up to the 1980s. So every room is completely different and will give people a chance to immerse themselves in the way people actually lived in that particular decade.
Mrs. Carter, I understand you were instrumental in decorating the rooms.
Well, when we started doing this, Jimmy says, you're in charge of the decorations. But it was fun looking for and finding the furniture of the period. We really tried to do it exactly like it was in that decade and use things that were actually from the decade.
It's remarkable how you really did pay attention to every little minute detail, down to the telephone and the rugs, and
in particular the bathrooms.
The bathrooms are extraordinary. I am in the 1930s room, and it took me by surprise to pull the chain and have the water come down from below, up above and everything. It was a lot of fun.
And particularly to go back and find a pull chain, John.
And the shower.
And the shower with the clawfoot tub.
It was so unusual. To be honest, I had no idea it was like that. You have to turn this one, and this one,
That's
and
right.
this one.
And you have hot in one and cold in the other, so you have to put a stopper in the bottom.
And it still isn't coming on, okay?
I think that was the hardest, to get the bathrooms all together. That can't believe how many details there are in putting a bathroom together. I never had tried to do that before.
And I believe even President Jimmy Carter has to really work to get things he wants, like a balcony on his inn.
We had a terrible time, I did, using my influence, which was minimal in that case, to get approval for a balcony because it is a National Historic Site. This building did not have a balcony, but down the street I showed the Park Service a 1925 photograph, so we had a balcony in a different building, and they finally said, okay, if you'll build your balcony exactly the way it was in 1925, you can do it. So we finally got approval.
Well, now I know that Plains has a bed and breakfast across the street, but other than that, was the inn really is the only other place to stay? Well, you guys needed this.
Well, we did.
I know.
We hope that when tourists come here to visit, well, one thing we had in mind is, you know, the nice tourists might stay here 7 nights. In the 1920s, 30s.
Oh.
Actually, we had one man ask us if he
true.
could do that. And something else Plains has, too, is 2 good restaurants. We have Mom's Kitchen, which is really Southern food at its best.
It is very
And
southern.
then we have a little coffee
We ate
shop
there
with
last
good
night.
food, too.
I had pecan pie for breakfast this morning from Mom's Kitchen. It was wonderful. Most everything you'll want to see in Plains is within walking distance. The inn sits atop a beautiful antiques mall containing 25 booths and 13 display cases, hosting a myriad of beautiful collectibles, sure to satisfy the art lover in everyone. Directly across the street is the old train depot, where President Carter ran his presidential campaign. But for the Carters, their personal history with the old train depot goes much further back.
Well, when I grew up here, Rose and I grew up here, there were 4 passenger trains a day that came through Plains, loaded down.
Really?
Yeah, and an uncountable number of freight trains that went through. There was no trucking much to haul stuff, and most people didn't have automobiles, so the trains were the focal point of our life. Out at Archery, at the boyhood home, I and my black playmates, that's all the playmates I had, would walk up the railroad track and put a little leather flag in a hole in a cross tie, and the conductor would see the flag and stop the train and let us get on. And I would go to the white folks section, my black friends would go to the colored section, and we would ride over to Americus and walk hand in hand to the theater as buddies and friends. At the theater we had to separate again. I went downstairs to the nice seats, he went upstairs to the colored section, and then we would enjoy the same movie and afterwards come back home as best of friends. That's the way life was.
When traveling through Carter Country, 2-lane travelers will definitely want to hop off the dusty trail to take advantage of a new excursion train called the Sam Short Line. It runs from Cordele to Leslie, Americus, Plains, and finally to Archery, the boyhood home of President Carter. The Sam Short Line has been revived by the efforts of the people in and around Plains, including President and Mrs. Carter, with the help of the Department of Natural Resources, which has taken the Sam Short Line and made it an official Georgia state park, a rolling state park, if you will. Initially, the Sam Short Line was named after its historic route, which went from Savannah to Americus in Georgia, then to Montgomery, Alabama. The route for the new Sam excursion begins in Cordele, Georgia, the watermelon capital of the world. The next stop is Leslie, home to a fabulous telephone museum.
It's one of maybe the finest telephone museum anywhere in the world that Tommy Smith has put together.
In fact, Tommy Smith even consulted on the vintage phones found at the Plains Historic Inn.
So folks can stop in Leslie, and then they can stop in Americus, and then of course come to Plains, which we feel to be the focal point of everything.
Americus may not be the focal point of the trip, according to President Carter, but it's definitely a place you should visit. The crowning jewel of Americus, Georgia, is the Windsor Hotel. It was originally built in 1892 and fashioned after the finest hotels of 19th century Europe. Just down the street from the Windsor is the historic Rylander Theater. It's an authentically restored 1921 theater, sitting 630 people on 3 different levels. You can enjoy a scheduled tour of this exquisite theater, refreshment from the restored soda fountain, and you know what? They actually show movies, and you can get a ticket for $3. But that's not all you do here, is it?
Oh no, we do theatrical productions, concerts, programs on our big, beautiful theater organ. We do everything you can imagine in a theater.
So all you need to do is buy a ticket. If you had come to the theater in the 1920s here in Americus, more than likely you would have listened to the music on a Moeller organ like this behind the silent film you were watching. This is a 1928 Moeller organ. By the way, did you know that the world headquarters for Habitat for Humanity is located in Americus, Georgia?
In Americus, as part of the excursion train attractions, there will be a global village that will show how 40 different styles of homes that Habitat has built in countries around the world.
That will be, in effect, a microcosm of what we do around the world. We are building 44 houses there. Half a dozen of those houses are currently under construction. Already, with it just under construction, we are having thousands of visitors.
Habitat is a very important part of our life and also the life of this particular community, because Habitat started here now more than 20 years ago.
And now for our traveler tip. If you choose interstates for travel, then one of the advantages are the many rest areas that you and your family can stop at and enjoy. First and foremost, rest areas provide clean, accessible restrooms. They also provide a place to walk your dog. They have picnic tables where you can enjoy a snack you brought from home, or you might enjoy the concessions that you find here at the rest areas. A number of rest areas also have Department of Transportation information kiosks. These kiosks can give you information about traffic jams, road construction, weather, even flight information if you happen to need it. Adding to the historic distinction of Carter Country is one of the nation's most notorious Civil War memorials, Andersonville National Historic Site and National Prisoner of War Museum. While it's not on the excursion route, it's only a 10-mile drive north of Plains. Tales of Andersonville's infamy take on the surreal at the chilling sight of countless rows of nameless graves. Graves marked only with numbers to identify the soldiers who perished here.
This is the little town of Andersonville here, and it served during the Civil War as supply center for Andersonville Confederate Prison. All the prisoners came in on that railroad track you see behind me. They all got off right here, and they were marched 1/4 mile east, which is that way, into the prison stockade. When the Confederates built the prison to hold Union soldiers in, they thought they would have no more than 10,000 at the very most, and then they received 45,000 prisoners, so it was woefully overcrowded. They didn't have enough food, they didn't have enough tents, they were supposed to sleep in tents, and the creek that was supposed to supply cooking water, bathing water, and drinking water became terribly, terribly polluted. So to drink that water made illnesses break out in epidemic forms. And because of all those reasons, 13,000 prisoners died there in 14 months. The prison was only open 14 months, the last 14 months of the Civil War.
Well, Andersonville National Historic Site is the only national park that is dedicated to the story of American prisoners of war. And we have here the National Prisoner of War Museum, which opened in 1998, where we tell the story of American prisoners of war from the Revolution right up to the Gulf War. The town of Andersonville, actually it's the Andersonville Guild and the town, have a mock battle twice a year. They do it on Memorial Day weekend and the first full weekend in October. And that brings a lot of visitors to the area and generates a lot of interest. Activities in the town bring a lot of people to the general area and especially to the park.
Just down the tracks from Plains is Archery, Georgia, where President Carter and I visited the site of his boyhood home, also a national park. It was there that he pointed out some interesting facts about the home.
This house is unchanged, and the Park Service have devoted a lot of time to investigating the history of it and making sure that it's the way it was in 1937. And they discovered, to my surprise, that it's a Sears Roebuck house. Mr. Sears had 4 models of homes that a family could buy. This was the next to the lowest cost and size.
Inside, I had a chance to see a beautiful home, a place where a future president sat around a dinner table with his family, the bedroom where he slept, and read books that he loved so much. As I walked these halls, I was moved to consider that this modest, humble home was the place that had once housed the future leader of the free world. And now for our traveler trivia. Who was the first president of the United States to be born in a hospital? The answer, you've got it, our own Jimmy Carter. Next, President Carter took me on a tour of the grounds, where he shared some of his favorite childhood memories.
This is my favorite place.
Is it?
Well, the barn, I mean,
Do you sharpen your tools here?
yeah, and this ran almost full time. But this is where we sharpen our knives and scissors and plow points and hoes and everything else.
And your axes.
Axes. This is where we we did all of our blacksmithing and carpenter work in this place. And I would turn the crank for my daddy. He was an expert blacksmith, and he did all of the iron work here. Jack Clark, Rachel's husband, he was responsible for shoeing the horses. Daddy didn't shoe the horses, but Jack Clark did. And I would hold, with the tongs, I would hold the heated metal on the anvil while my daddy would hit it.
Now this was the store, the general store, eh?
We had standard things like grits and meal and flour and sugar, and a lot of tobacco products then.
Just the basics.
The basics. We had a few shoes and overalls. You could buy a pair of shoes for $1.50.
Look at your buggy, that's beautiful.
Oh, that's really a little bit of an anomaly here. We didn't have a buggy like that. We had wagons like the one over there.
Oh, I see.
And the one over here. This is a milking shed. We generally had about 12 milk cows. A maximum of 8 of them were fresh, or that is giving milk. The rest of them were just in the pasture. And so we milked them in that barn. Jack Clark and I milked the cows.
And he rang the bell to wake everybody up?
Yeah, he rang the bell in the morning. This was developed originally to cook syrup in. Every year we would have maybe 20 or 25 acres of sugar cane, and Daddy would make syrup, put it in bottles and cans, and sell it to the stores around here. Yeah, Daddy believed in whenever it was humanly possible to take a raw product from the farm and process it. So the Park Service now do the garden, and they try to show visitors here how a garden was. And of course, Rosa and I don't hesitate to come out here and pick peas or get some sweet corn.
See some corn over there that can be picked.
And some okra down there.
You know, I worked for the University of Georgia on an experiment station for a while, and I was learning about where some of our fruits and vegetables came from, and a lot of them came from Africa.
That's true. In fact, gumbo is what they called okra then.
We were blessed with their knowledge.
Oh, we were. And
You recognize that early on. Most folks take don't even give it credit or anything.
Well, I recognize it even later than I should have.
I don't know about that.
Nobody.
I think Miss Rachel kept you in line.
Well, you know, even she never raised the issue of racial discrimination or segregation. I mean, it wasn't a subject that I ever recall being discussed by anyone. There were no black militants, no white liberals that ever said we need to change this system back in those days.
Life was what it was.
Yeah, it was. Daddy put this windmill in 1935, and that was the first time we had water going into our house. Before that we had to pump
I bet
water.
Miss Lillian was beside herself.
Well, all of us were, you know.
I saw the shower with the bucket.
Well, Daddy rigged that up.
It's pretty clever.
Yeah, it was.
Back on the porch, President Carter reminisced about some of the people who most influenced him. People like Miss Julia Coleman, a teacher at Plains High School, where both President and Mrs. Carter attended. You did pay your teacher from the school an amazing compliment she was the first teacher ever quoted in an inaugural address. What was it that she said to you that inspired you?
Well, Miss Julia used to say two things that I remember. One was she would look at us in the room and she said, remember that any one of you boys can someday become president. Nobody paid attention to that.
Everybody says that.
And the other thing she said was that we have to adjust to changing times, but cling to unchanging principles.
Wow.
And I think that's a profound statement.
It is.
And it's one that I try to remember when I was evolving as a young man, changing my careers, ultimately deciding to run for public office, serving as president, coming back home. But it's always a reminder that we can't be too hidebound in our prejudices or our habits, personal habits, not to accommodate the way the world changes. But there are certain elements of life that never change. And we should, as Miss Julia Coleman said, cling to those.
And then he talked about the love of his life. I guess you all sat on this porch swing many a times, haven't you?
Well,
Or
as a
maybe
matter
it
of
was
fact-
her porch swing at her
yeah,
house.
we did. As a matter of fact, Rosalynn was 3 years younger than I was when I was in high school.
She's still 3 years younger.
Still 3 years younger. But then there was a vast chasm between us.
Sure.
She was just a child, and I was more interested in, more mature girls at the time. I was going actually with Miss Georgia Southwestern, a beautiful girl from Buena Vista, Georgia, nearby, when I asked Rosalynn out for a first date because Annelle, my girlfriend, had to go to a family reunion. So I picked Rosalynn up in front of the Methodist church, and we went to the movie together. And the next morning, Mama asked me what I did the night before, and I said, I went to a movie. And she said, did you have anybody with you? I said, yeah, I picked up Rosalynn Smith. She said, what did you think of her? And I said, she said, one I'm going to marry.
No, you knew right away.
Yep.
Oh, what a romantic story. That's
And then
wonderful.
6 months later, I was still in the Naval Academy. I asked Rosalynn to marry me, and she turned me down. So I went into the depths of despair for about 4 or 5 months.
Oh, no.
And finally, she agreed. So that was 56 years ago.
Well, we are so happy she did.
Well, I am too, yeah.
It seems to me like there was one Rachel Clark who seemed to have a great influence on your life, and I knew that from your new book that you just put out. I mean, come on.
She
An
was.
African-American woman to have that kind of influence, and you grew up to be president.
Well, in An Hour Before Daylight, I described in the whole book my early life. Sharecroppers and racial discrimination, but the intimacy with which we lived together. We didn't have any white neighbors. I didn't have any white playmates. They were all black kids and adults. And after I wrote that book, toward the end of it, I thought I would describe, other than my mother and father, who really shaped my life. There were 5 people who did so. Only 2 of them were white. And Rachel Clark was a dominant factor in establishing for me the way I ought to live. When I was little, I followed her around like a puppy dog. And then later, I was thrilled when she would say, Jimmy, you want to go fishing today, during a rainy weather or something. And then so I would, follow Rachel to the creek, and she would teach me how to bait my hook. And every time I caught one fish, she would catch 5 or 6. But then on the way home, she would slip a few of her fish in my bag, so I could come home and present proudly, enough fish out of the creek to feed my family. And Rachel would never mention the fact that she caught some of the fish. I would say, in the eyes of God, that Rachel Clark was at least as successful in life as I was.
Certainly she was. I wished everybody had a Rachel Clark in their life. Everybody should have one.
I agree.
Is there anything that you can't do is the question. I mean, you were president, you build houses, you renovate buildings, you write poetry, you write books.
Well, one thing I couldn't do was get reelected president.
For most people, being president of the United States would be the pinnacle of their career. But for Jimmy Carter, it was only a part of the big picture. Since leaving office, he has lent his name, time, energy, and commitment to a host of worthwhile projects. My 2-lane travels brought me someplace completely unexpected this week. I expected to meet a president and a leader, and I did. But I also found a genuinely warm, humble, and humorous man, and his lovely and elegant First Lady, both of whom I'm very proud to know. Well, that wraps up our tour of Carter Country. I hope you've had a good time. I know I have. But it's time to say goodbye. So for everybody here at 2-Lane Traveler, I'm Robin Russell. We'll see you again next time. I think I'm just going to sit here and wait for a train to go by.
For a copy of today's show, call 1-888-505-9797 or visit our website at www.twoLaneTraveler.com. 2-Lane Traveler is brought to you by the generous support of the Georgia Department of Transportation and the following organizations. The perfect getaway has been here all along. Perhaps you were just too close to see it. Discover the treasures of Georgia. On your two-lane travels through Georgia, explore our 63 state parks and historic sites where you can enjoy camping, hiking, fishing, picnicking, and more. Georgia State Parks. Come out and play. Imagine a musical landscape where young bluegrass pickers perform with old blues musicians, jazz players, country crooners, and rock and rollers. Now, go find it. Savor the Southeast. Visit us on the web at www.escapetothesoutheast.com.